My name is Claire Whitmore, and I was 35 years old when my husband unknowingly handed me the most important decision of my life. We had been married for 7 years, raising our 4-year-old daughter, Emma, in what everyone from the outside believed was a happy home. My husband, Daniel, worked hard, adored our daughter, and never failed to provide financially. But there was one part of our marriage that slowly poisoned everything else: his complete inability to stand up to his family. The moment his parents or younger sister entered the picture, the man I married disappeared, replaced by someone desperate to keep them happy, no matter who got hurt in the process. For years, I convinced myself that it wasn't worth fighting over. Every sarcastic remark from his mother about my cooking, every unnecessary criticism about how I dressed Emma, every joke at my expense from his sister was brushed aside because Daniel always gave the exact same excuse. They're just outspoken. Don't take it personally. I wanted peace. So I swallowed my pride again and again, believing things would eventually improve. Instead, they only became worse. The breaking point arrived during Daniel's father's birthday celebration at his parents' house. The backyard overflowed with relatives, children running across the lawn, music playing through outdoor speakers, and conversations happening at every table. Emma sat beside me eating slices of apple while everyone chatted around us. Without warning, my mother-in-law walked over, looked down at Emma's plate, and frowned with obvious disapproval. She asked if I was still refusing to let Emma eat cake whenever she wanted. I calmly explained that our pediatrician recommended limiting sugar because Emma had frequent stomach problems. She immediately laughed loud enough for nearby relatives to hear and announced that modern parents trusted doctors more than common sense. Her comment drew chuckles from several family members, including Daniel's sister, Melissa, who joined in by saying, I spent too much time reading parenting blogs and acting like I knew everything. Normally, I would have forced a smile and ignored it. But this time, something inside me simply refused to stay silent. I answered politely that following professional medical advice wasn't something anyone should be mocked for. The laughter disappeared instantly. My mother-in-law crossed her arms and accused me of speaking disrespectfully to her in front of everyone. Melissa quickly added that I always created unnecessary drama at family gatherings. Within seconds, the conversation transformed into a trial where everyone suddenly had something negative to say about me. They claimed I never appreciated the family, that I always acted superior, that I couldn't take a harmless joke. I looked toward Daniel, desperately waiting for him to stop the conversation before it spiraled even further. He only sat there avoiding eye contact while the criticism continued. That silence hurt more than every insult combined because it reminded me that once again, I was standing completely alone. Finally, after another cutting remark from Melissa about how exhausting I was to be around, I calmly admitted that years of constant criticism had become unbearable and that I was tired of pretending otherwise. The entire backyard fell silent. Every relative stared at me as though I had committed an unforgivable crime simply by telling the truth. Daniel immediately stood up, his face red with embarrassment, and told me to stop talking. I quietly shook my head. For the first time in years, I refused to apologize for defending myself. His expression hardened before he pointed toward the front gate and delivered the sentence that changed everything. Either apologize to my family right now, or leave. Everyone waited confidently for me to lower my head like I always had before. Instead, I calmly stood from my chair, walked inside the house, packed Emma's small backpack, carried her sleeping body to the car, and drove away without saying another word. That silent drive home became the beginning of an entirely different life, even though nobody sitting at that barbecue had the slightest idea what I had already decided. The days that followed were strangely peaceful, because I stopped trying to convince anyone that my feelings mattered. Daniel assumed I simply needed time to cool off, while his family acted as though I was the one who had ruined the celebration. My phone filled with messages from his mother reminding me that elders deserved respect, from Melissa insisting I had embarrassed the entire family, and from distant relatives encouraging me to apologize so everyone could move on. Not one person asked how I felt or acknowledged the years of constant criticism that had led to that moment. I answered almost none of the messages. Instead, I focused on Emma, who seemed noticeably calmer now that we were away from the endless family tension. Every evening after she fell asleep, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and quietly planned a future I had never imagined I would actually pursue. Several years earlier, one of my closest friends Ava had moved to New Zealand after accepting a management position with an international company. Back then, she had encouraged me to apply as well, believing my experience would make me a perfect fit. But I had declined because Daniel didn't want to leave his parents. Remembering that conversation, I decided I had nothing to lose by reaching out. I sent Ava a message explaining that I was looking for a fresh start and asking whether her company still had opportunities available. I expected a polite response or perhaps a suggestion to try elsewhere, but instead she called me the following morning with surprising news. The company had expanded rapidly, and they urgently needed someone with my qualifications. She arranged interviews over video calls, introduced me to the hiring manager, and within days I found myself speaking to people who treated me with more respect than I had experienced in years. Every conversation filled me with cautious hope. 2 weeks later, I received a formal job offer, along with relocation, assistance that would make the move financially possible. My hands trembled as I read the email, because for the first time, my future depended entirely on my own decision. I accepted immediately. From that moment forward, every spare minute became part of a carefully organized plan. I researched neighborhoods, enrolled Emma in a preschool near the apartment Ava helped me secure, transferred important documents, consulted legal professionals about custody requirements, organized our finances, and sold or donated anything we wouldn't need. Everything was handled legally and methodically because I refused to make emotional decisions that might later affect my daughter. Meanwhile, Daniel behaved exactly as I expected. He brought home flowers one evening, ordered my favorite meals another night, and spoke as though our disagreement had simply been a temporary misunderstanding. "We've both been stubborn," he said during dinner with a confident smile. "Let's forget it happened." Looked at him quietly, realizing he still believed the problem was one argument instead of 7 years of choosing everyone else over his wife. His family continued pretending nothing serious had happened, inviting us to another gathering as if repeating the same cycle would somehow fix it. I politely declined every invitation without offering explanations. The more silent I became, the more uncomfortable everyone else seemed. They couldn't twist my words because I wasn't giving them any. Inside, however, my resolve only grew stronger. Every completed checklist, every signed document, every approved application reminded me that I wasn't running away from my marriage. I was walking toward a healthier future for myself and for Emma. By the time everything was finalized, our departure date was only days away, and no one in Daniel's family suspected that the quiet woman they believed would eventually apologize had already packed away an entirely different life waiting on the other side of the world. The final week before our departure felt surreal because I was living two completely different lives at once. Outwardly, everything appeared normal. I took Emma to preschool every morning, went to work, prepared dinner, folded laundry, and carried on conversations as if nothing significant was about to happen. In reality, every day brought another completed task that moved us closer to leaving. Our passports, visas, travel documents, housing agreement, and moving arrangements were all in place. I transferred my savings into a new account, organized important records, and carefully packed only the belongings that truly mattered. I wasn't trying to erase my past, I was simply refusing to let it define my future. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed convinced that time had solved everything. One evening, he arrived home carrying takeout from my favorite restaurant, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed the crisis had passed. As we ate dinner after Emma had gone to bed, he casually said he was glad we had both calmed down and that families argued all the time before eventually moving on. Listening to him, I realized he still hadn't understood what had actually broken inside me. He believed I was upset about one humiliating afternoon, while I knew it had been the final chapter in years of being dismissed whenever I tried to protect my own dignity. I simply nodded and said very little, allowing him to believe whatever made him comfortable. The following morning, after Daniel left for work, I dressed Emma, loaded our suitcases into the car, took one final look around the house, and quietly locked the front door behind us. On the kitchen counter, I left a handwritten letter explaining everything with complete honesty. I wrote that I wasn't leaving to punish him or keep him from his daughter. I was leaving because I refused to teach Emma that love meant accepting disrespect in exchange for temporary peace. I explained that every time he stayed silent while his family criticized me, he made a choice, and eventually I had been forced to make one as well. Halfway through airport security, my phone began vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails, and emails appeared one after another. Daniel had found the letter. His messages shifted from confusion to anger and finally to panic within minutes. He begged me to answer, asking where I was and insisting we could still fix everything. I waited until we were safely seated on the airplane before returning his call. The moment he heard my voice, he sounded like a man who had finally realized the consequences of his own actions. He asked if I was really leaving the country and whether I truly intended to take Emma with me. I calmly explained that everything had been arranged, legally, and that I had spent weeks making sure every decision protected our daughter's future. He pleaded with me to come back so we could talk, promising that things would be different. I looked out the airplane window as the runway disappeared beneath us and quietly replied that conversations should have happened years earlier, not only after I finally stopped accepting the life everyone expected me to endure. The call ended without shouting or insults, only silence heavy enough to say everything words never had. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, Emma rested peacefully against my shoulder, completely unaware that our lives had just changed forever. Watching the clouds stretch endlessly beneath us, I felt fear, sadness, uncertainty, and hope all at once. But stronger than any of those emotions was a feeling I had almost forgotten existed. For the first time since my marriage began, I felt completely free. Starting over in New Zealand was far from easy, but every challenge reminded me that I had chosen a life built on peace instead of constant conflict. The first few months were filled with unfamiliar streets, new coworkers, endless paperwork, and the exhausting process of helping Emma settle into a different environment. To my surprise, she adapted much faster than I did. Her teachers often commented on how cheerful and confident she was, and I realized I hadn't seen her laugh so freely in a very long time. Our home was finally quiet. There were no unexpected visits, no sarcastic remarks disguised as jokes, and no family gatherings where I had to prepare myself for criticism before walking through the front door. That calm allowed both of us to heal. Daniel continued calling regularly to speak with Emma, and over time, our conversations slowly shifted from arguments to honest discussions. Living thousands of miles away forced him to face the reality he had ignored for years. Without his mother's constant influence or his sister's endless excuses, he began recognizing the pattern that had damaged our marriage from the very beginning. Several months later, he admitted that he had watched me endure countless humiliating moments simply because standing up to his family felt harder than asking me to stay silent. Hearing him finally accept responsibility meant more than any apology he could have offered immediately after I left. Eventually, he traveled to New Zealand to spend time with Emma, and during that visit, we talked for hours without raising our voices. He apologized sincerely, not only for the ultimatum at his parents' house, but for every moment he chose comfort over loyalty. He admitted that telling me to apologize or leave had never been a real choice in his mind because he had assumed I would always sacrifice my own dignity to keep everyone else happy. His parents reached out months later with apologies of their own, acknowledging that they had crossed boundaries they never believed existed until those boundaries finally separated us. Melissa also admitted that years of mocking and criticizing me had been cruel, even if she had once convinced herself it was harmless teasing. Forgiveness did not happen overnight, and I never pretended that one conversation erased years of pain. Instead, trust was rebuilt slowly through actions, honesty, and clear boundaries that everyone finally respected. Today, Daniel and I share a healthier relationship than we ever had during our marriage because it is no longer built on silence or fear of upsetting other people. Whether we eventually remained together or simply became better parents to Emma, the most important victory was that our daughter grew up seeing adults treat one another with respect instead of expecting one person to endure endless mistreatment for the sake of family harmony. Looking back, I no longer think about the barbecue, the argument, or even the ultimatum itself. I think about the moment. I realized my life belonged to me and that no one else had the right to decide how much disrespect I should tolerate. The day Daniel told me to apologize or leave, he believed he was forcing me into submission. Instead, he unknowingly opened a door that led me toward freedom, self-respect, and a future I never would have discovered if I had stayed exactly where everyone expected me to be.